Disclaimer. This content may include dramatized or exaggerated interpretations of real-life events, including reports based on public speculation or commentary. While intended for entertainment purposes, viewer discretion is advised, as not all details may be factual or independently verified. It was day 13 of the People vs. Sean Diddy Combs, and no one saw this coming. Kid Cudi took the stand. Yes, Kid Cudi. The moment his name was called, there were audible gasps. One woman in the gallery dropped her pen. A court officer, trying hard not to react, tilted his head like he'd misheard. But he hadn't.
Wearing a gray suit and a solemn expression, Scott Mescudi walked slowly to the witness box. There was no music in the background, no applause, just the heavy sound of truth about to be told. The judge nodded. The court recorder readied her fingers. Prosecutor Elena Cruz stood tall and calm. She spoke only one sentence. "Mr. Mescudi, do you recall the events of September 4th, 2016? He took a deep breath. "Yes, I do," he said, voice low. And with that, the silence broke like glass.
What followed in the next 28 minutes would change the tone of the trial, possibly forever. It wasn't just testimony. It was confession, revelation, an unraveling of power and pain that had been stitched together for years. Cudi spoke of manipulation, intimidation, a private party in Miami, a deal gone wrong, and something else. Something everyone in the room had suspected for years, but had never dared say aloud. When he finished, there was no sound, no movement, just the soft click of the judge's gavel calling for recess.
Outside, media vans scrambled to rewrite headlines. Inside, the prosecution exchanged glances. Calm, but victorious. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. And Diddy, he didn't flinch. But the jury did. Sean Diddy Combs, the architect of Bad Boy Records, the kingmaker of late 90s hip-hop, and a billionaire media titan, now sat stone-faced behind the defendant's table. But this wasn't about empires. Not anymore. This was about allegations that had cast a shadow over his legacy. Power, intimidation, control. It began with a civil lawsuit filed by singer Cassie Ventura, a woman many knew only as Diddy's longtime girlfriend and protege. Her lawsuit, filed quietly in late 2023, named years of alleged abuse: physical, emotional, and financial. Her claims included forced encounters, manipulation, and even orchestrated violence. But it didn't stop there.
In the weeks following her filing, a tidal wave of allegations surged forward. 3 more women stepped out of the shadows. Their stories differed in time and detail, but shared the same chilling tone. Fear wrapped in luxury. A mansion here, a trip to Paris there. But behind the curtains, control, secrecy, silence. Now, nearly a year later, those stories have become part of a federal criminal case. The charges? Conspiracy, sex trafficking, unlawful surveillance, and more. What made Day 13 so different? Because it brought in someone from the inside, someone from the same world. Kid Cudi wasn't just a famous face. He was part of the culture Diddy helped create. And he'd once tried to distance himself from it. But in that courtroom, Cudi laid bare an unspoken truth. That silence in the industry wasn't protection. It was participation.
What had started as a high-profile trial was morphing into something bigger. A reckoning for the music world. A confrontation with the price of fame. And a look into how influence shields predators. Until it doesn't. Prosecutor Cruz framed the trial with cutting clarity. This is about a pattern of exploitation that hides behind money and status. It's about what happens when men like Mr. Combs believe they are beyond consequence. The defense, led by Marcus Daly, pushed back hard. This is a witch hunt. My client is being scapegoated for an industry's sins. Where's the evidence? But evidence was coming, bit by bit. CCTV footage from a hotel, secret text threads, NDAs that surfaced with signatures and timestamps, former employees breaking silence, and now Cudi. There was no turning back. Not for the court, not for Diddy, and not for an industry watching one of its giants fall from grace. This isn't just about what happened behind closed doors. It's about the price of silence.
And the voices now, you're refusing to stay quiet. To understand the gravity of what's unfolding in Courtroom 7A, we must step back, way back, to a time when Sean Combs wasn't Diddy, when he wasn't a mogul, a fashion icon, or the kingmaker behind Bad Boy Records. Born in Harlem and raised in Mount Vernon, New York, Combs clawed his way into the music industry with charisma, hustle, and an almost surgical sense for trends. By the early 1990s, he was managing artists, throwing parties and making himself indispensable in East Coast hip-hop. In 1993, he founded Bad Boy Records. And then came the avalanche. Biggie, Faith Evans, Total, 112, Mace. The label redefined the sound and look of an era. Diddy wasn't just making music. He was crafting moments. Shiny suits, champagne-drenched videos, Billboard-topping hits. He sold success. Lavish, loud, untouchable. But behind the curtains, darker currents flowed.
In 1999, a nightclub shooting in Manhattan left 3 people injured and Combs arrested, though eventually acquitted. The trial made headlines, and Jennifer Lopez, then his girlfriend, was by his side. But whispers began. Stories of rage, control, the kind of unchecked power that came from knowing too many people owed you too much. Fast forward to the 2000s. Diddy expanded. Fashion, vodka, reality TV, award shows. He became a one-man empire, a billionaire in the making. But behind closed doors, insiders say the empire operated like a fortress. Loyalty was demanded. NDAs were routine. Victims rebranded as liars, complainers, gold diggers. Over the years, more stories leaked. A former chef alleged harassment. An ex-girlfriend spoke of psychological torment. Lawsuits were filed. Many settled quietly. Then, in 2023, the bombshell.
Cassie, Diddy's longtime partner and former protege, filed a lawsuit detailing a pattern of abuse, coercion, and surveillance. The case was settled within 24 hours. But something shifted. The silence cracked. More women stepped forward. Anonymous tips flooded journalists' inboxes. Legal teams began circling. And then came the indictment. Federal investigations, raids on Diddy's homes, seized electronics, witness lists as long as album credits. By the time the trial began in early 2025, the world had changed. The court of public opinion was no longer on his side. And the courtroom? It was packed. This wasn't just about one man. This was about an entire era, built on soundtracks, seduction, and silence. And on day 13, that silence shattered. The courtroom lights felt hotter than ever. On day 13, the air was dense, charged with something unspoken. The defense had been playing chess. But the prosecution, today, they flipped the board.
Key witness number 1, the ex-bodyguard. They called him Marcus Tank Bledsoe, ex-military, towering, voice like gravel in a steel drum. For over a decade, he was one of Diddy's most trusted protectors. But loyalty, as he would soon reveal, has limits. He took the stand in a crisp gray suit. The gallery fell into a hush. Mr. Bledsoe, the prosecutor began, how long did you work for Sean Combs? 11 years. And during that time, did you ever feel unsafe around him? Tank didn't blink. Not me, but the women, all the time. Gasps. One juror's pen slipped from her hand. Tank described hotel parties turned hostage situations. He mentioned a woman crying in the back of a limousine, begging to go home. But she didn't have her passport, or phone, or dignity. When asked why he didn't come forward sooner, his jaw clenched. Because when you leave a man like Diddy, you don't just lose a job, you lose safety.
Key witness number 2, the personal assistant. Then came Leah Martinez. A stark contrast, soft-spoken, wide-eyed, her voice shaking as she recounted her years living in Diddy's guest house. I was told never to look certain guests in the eyes. If a woman cried, I was supposed to bring towels and not ask questions. Did you ever feel complicit? The prosecution asked. Her hands trembled. Every day, she spoke about NDAs, about signing documents while half asleep or emotionally broken. She brought copies, originals, signed by Diddy, notarized. The jury reacts. Every paper she submitted was passed along like radioactive material. Jurors leaned in, eyes narrowed. One rubbed his temple as if trying to unsee the reality in front of him. The revelation, the missing audio file. And then came the audio.
An encrypted USB drive had been anonymously submitted to the court via a whistleblower hotline 2 days prior. Its contents were verified by a digital forensics team. On it, a 47-second voice memo allegedly recorded by one of Diddy's former partners. You think you can leave? You don't leave. I made you. I'll end you if I have to. The room froze. The prosecution didn't say who was speaking. They didn't need to. Everyone knew. The defense objected furiously. They claimed the tape lacked context, claimed it was fabricated, claimed chain of custody couldn't be verified. But the prosecution only smiled. We didn't say this was the only copy. The shock in the crowd. A woman in the back row stood up and walked out crying. No one stopped her. A reporter whispered into her phone with urgency. 2 celebrities who had come to support Diddy quietly exited before the recess was called. Day 13 wasn't just another day of testimony. It was the day the courtroom listened. Truly listened.
They didn't just hear voices. They heard warning shots. And for the first time, the walls around Diddy's carefully curated silence began to crack. Zooming out of the ornate oak-lined courtroom in downtown Manhattan, we find ourselves not in a vacuum, but in a recurring cycle. One that the entertainment industry has spun for decades. Sean Diddy Combs' trial isn't just about him. It's about the power structure that made him, protected him, and for years allowed silence to be a form of currency. This case has peeled back the veil on a system where wealth and fame do not just open doors, they lock them behind those who try to escape. Behind each revelation is a pattern of complicity, a system of NDAs, silent settlements, power silos. It's a story about fear, not just the fear of speaking up, but the fear of what happens when you finally do.
In court, attorneys referenced the now infamous pattern of lavish coercion. Not just one woman, not just one party. This was a rhythm, praying, silencing, discarding. Former industry insider Yolanda Grant, who once worked at a major record label in the early 2000s, testified, off the record to press, but confirmed through legal filings, that there was an unspoken code in music circles. You didn't cross certain men, and if you did, you vanished. This vanishing didn't mean a disappearance in the literal sense. It meant a career stalled, a tour canceled, a collaboration quietly scrapped. The courtroom became more than just a place to assess guilt. It became a portal into the toxic churn of celebrity culture, where image was everything, and truth was whatever the most powerful said it was. Even the brands associated with Diddy, luxury vodka lines, fashion houses, music distribution giants, have started to feel the sting.
Whispers of them severing ties now echo louder than ever. The fallout isn't just legal, it's economic, it's reputational, it's generational. What happens when the man you built an empire around is no longer safe to protect? One lawyer whispered during recess, they're not just defending Diddy anymore. They're defending the system that allowed Diddy to thrive. It's bigger than one man. This trial is a reckoning for an entire era of unchecked power, and for the silence that once wrapped it in velvet and called it brilliance. And as the walls begin to close in on Combs, the industry's walls are shifting too, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. Because if he falls, who falls next? The courtroom was oppressively quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from boredom. It was the breath-holding kind. The kind that precedes a detonation. Cassie Ventura returned to the stand.
This time, she didn't look like the frightened woman from a week ago. Her shoulders were squared, eyes steady, voice like glass, delicate but sharp enough to cut. She held the courtroom in her grip. "Did you ever feel like your life was in danger while with Mr. Combs?" the prosecution asked, voice low but urgent. She didn't blink. More than once. Gasps rippled. A few jurors leaned in instinctively, and Diddy, whose composure had been flawless, shifted. Just once. But enough to be noticed. He threatened to have people follow me. He said he could ruin my life, end it, if I spoke. And for a long time, I believed him. The courtroom fell into a stunned hush. The judge allowed a moment. Even the bailiff looked shaken. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. The prosecution walked slowly across the courtroom, holding a small, sleek USB drive. They placed it gently on the edge of the witness stand.
"We received this 2 days ago," the prosecutor said. "From an anonymous source. It was sent directly to the DA's office. No name, no return address. Just a message. It's time." He inserted the drive into a laptop. The screen flickered to life. Static. Then a video. Blurry, but the voice was unmistakable. Angry, slurred. It was Diddy. "You ever think you can leave me, Cassie? Huh? You think I won't find you?" Her body froze. In the courtroom. On the screen. Same reaction. Like history folding in on itself. The voice continued. "I made you. I can end you." That was it. No more than 10 seconds. But it hit like a freight train. The courtroom was paralyzed. One juror put a hand over her mouth. Diddy's legal team shot up, objecting to the video's admissibility. But it was too late. The impact had been made, and the judge allowed it for consideration. And then, another shock from the defense's side.
His voice was quiet. It didn't roar like his songs or swagger like his red carpet struts. It was worn, hollowed. The courtroom stared. Against the advice of counsel, against every instinct of power, Sean Combs rose. He walked to the stand. "I won't answer questions," he began. "But I will say this." He looked directly at Cassie and then at the jury. "I made mistakes. I hurt people. I got caught up in a world where I thought I could do whatever I wanted. Because I could. And that's not right." His voice cracked. "I never meant to break anyone. But I see now maybe I did." It wasn't a confession. Not quite. But it wasn't a denial either. For once, the courtroom wasn't watching a mogul. It was watching a man. Frayed, flawed, and maybe, finally, falling apart. Cassie didn't look at him again. And the jury was left with the echo of something rare in courtroom history. The silence after power apologizes.
The courthouse emptied slowly that afternoon, but the weight of what had unfolded inside those walls lingered in the air like heavy smoke. There were no cheers, no angry mobs, just a quiet reckoning, some finally ready to believe, others still clinging to denial. Sean Diddy Combs left the courtroom in silence. His team shielded him with umbrellas and bodies, but the cameras caught enough. His eyes were glassy, jaw clenched, no swagger in his step. Outside, a reporter murmured. He looked like a man who knew something ended today. Cassie Ventura, whose voice had echoed across so many headlines, chose not to attend that final session. Her attorney said, "She's already lived the trauma. She doesn't need to watch it replayed." But her words, her story, and her strength had become the axis upon which this entire trial spun. And it spun hard.
Andre Jamal, the once bodyguard turned truth teller, received both death threats and job offers. But his statement in a follow-up interview was chilling. "You think this is over? This is just what got caught." Reverberations reached the upper echelons of Hollywood and music moguls. Deals froze. NDAs were questioned. A-list collaborators pulled statements. One major studio executive anonymously confessed to a journalist, "We knew about the parties. We didn't know it was that." The FBI's broader investigation, which had been paused, resumed with fresh subpoenas. More names floated to the surface. Producers, managers, even city officials who may have turned a blind eye. But what came next wasn't just legal, it was cultural. Artists began publicly disavowing old connections. Younger musicians rejected Diddy's blueprint for success. One viral post read, "If the price of power is silence in the face of horror, it's too high."
Yet, in the corners of the internet, a different story bloomed. One where Diddy was a target of takedown culture. Where men in power were painted as predators by default. Where memories became weapons. But the court had heard the truth. At least one version of it. In her final statement to the press, Cassie said only one thing. "This wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping the cycle. I told my truth. That's all I could do." She didn't scream. She didn't have to. The world had finally listened. And as the final gavel echoed down the halls of justice that day, a single phrase remained, etched in the silence. They built a silence machine. She tore it down, one word at a time.